Hello.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the time it took us to get adjusted.
Yeah. Well, I'm Anastasia Young. I am a nursing and religion double major, and Kelsey and I did this program, Social Justice, Peace, and Development, in India for a semester, and that's kind of why we're here.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Foster's talk really led into our topic really well of what we're going to be talking about today. So, like Anna said, last semester I traveled to India on the Social Justice, Peace, and Development semester, and Anna went the year before I did. This program is focused on these topics, and it's split up into 4 different courses. And one of the courses that we took while we were in India was called Environment, Ecology, and Sustainable Livelihood. So, during this course, we studied different grassroots responses to climate change and different environmental justice issues. And for our field visit for this course, we traveled to the state of Andhra Pradesh, which is a very rural part of India that is feeling the effects of climate change. Also during this course, we started to read a book called Heat by the columnist for The Guardian, George Monbiot. He's from Britain. And in this book, he has a chapter called Love Miles, which goes into our talk, The Dilemmas of Flying. He talks about how first world countries like the United States and the United Kingdom need to cut their carbon emissions by 90% in order to prevent the collapsing of major ecosystems all around the world. This is a really big number.
Yeah, and so the only way he proposes this to happen is to have a major reduction in the amount of flights taken by people in the US and UK. And we need to cut our carbon emission way down by flying less, or we need to find a way to cut 90% of this carbon emission in other ways. And he says this would be cutting our electricity, our heat, our transportation to and from work, or for food. And in the end, he says there's no possible way to cut enough carbon emission from other areas to make up for the carbon emission from flying.
So, obviously, this presents a little bit of a dilemma. We really struggled when we were reading this, and we were actually both assigned this reading while we were on our fall breaks during the semester, so both of us were traveling. Anna said that she read this while she was flying in an airplane.
Yep.
So, a little bit of issues with that. And we struggled with it too, because directly one of the quotes from the book, Monbiot says, "Much of the global justice movement consists of people whose politics were forged by their experiences abroad. While it is easy for us to pour scorn on the drivers of sports utility vehicles, whose politics generally differ from ours, it is rather harder to contemplate a world in which our own freedoms are curtailed, especially the freedoms which shaped us." The reason that Anna and I are standing up here right now, and the reason that we actually care about this and are thinking critically about this, is because we had to fly to India. We took 2 26-hour flights to go to India to start becoming aware of these issues and really thinking critically about them.
Yeah, so without our experience, we both recognize that our perspective on the environment and other injustices that are happening globally wouldn't have occurred in such a dramatic way without our experience to India, which we had to fly to get there. Mm-hmm. And so this leaves us in a really hard spot and left us questioning then as well as now, what does this mean for us? And what does this mean for future students who want to study abroad or go abroad to do work? How can we reconcile carbon emission when these experiences can be so dramatic and beneficial for the people who fly abroad?
So we thought that point transitioned nicely into thinking about Concordia College's strategic plan. This is something that was released earlier this academic year with a focus on 3 parts throughout the plan: whole self, whole life, and whole world. Now, in the component of whole world, there's a section on global education. And quoting from that, it says, "By 2017, have 75% of Concordia students studying internationally before they graduate." 75%. That's a lot of carbon emission. And so thinking about this, thinking about even some of the things that Dr. Foster was talking about in terms of what going abroad can do, we're wondering, knowing the facts now of how much carbon is emitted while you fly, can we ever really justify flying for the sake of experience or an education?
And George Monbiot says no. We have no comfort and no way to reconcile this. And he says, this means it's the end of foreign holidays, the end of flying home for Christmas, the end of flying for spring break trips. It's the end of flying to conferences and meetings and workshops. And he continues by saying, unless you believe these activities are worth the sacrifice of the biosphere and the lives of the poor. He continues by saying, but I urge you to remember that these privations affect a tiny portion of the world's people. The reason they seem so harsh is that tiny proportion most certainly includes you.
So reading this, then, while we were in India, while we were flying, traveling, knowing that eventually we had to take another plane to get home, to back to our regular lives, was really unsettling, and it's still really unsettling now. And I don't think, we don't have any answers for this, but we know that this is something that we can't ignore anymore. With climate change being such an important issue, flying is something that we can't ignore. We're doing a huge injustice to our environment and those it affects, and we can't ignore that Concordia and our focus on global education directly plays a part in this injustice. It doesn't affect us, though, because we're the ones in the world that have the ability to fly. We can pay $30,000 a year to come to Concordia, to come to a place where we can then decide to travel and spend a semester in Australia or India or Norway. In the strategic plan, Concordia calls students to practice thoughtful and informed stewardship of natural resources and to conserve Earth's vitality and beauty. And that's a quote directly from the strategic plan. So this is the dilemma. Concordia wants us to study abroad, to get a global education, and to reach out to different cultures and communities because we're products of that. We know that that benefited us so much, and that's why we're standing up here. However, how do we fulfill this goal when we also have this part of the mission statement that calls us to be stewards of the earth?
Like we've said, we don't have answers, and I personally am still struggling with this. This summer, I am flying to Norway as one of the Peace Scholars, and so I had to go through this debate of, can I justify flying, or do I go, or do I not? And of course, there's always a way to justify it. But we want to leave you with the words of George Monbiot that I think keep us unsettled and remind us that we cannot ignore this, and as a community, collectively, we need to talk about this and think about how our programs going abroad can at least talk about this issue. Mm-hmm. So in the words of George Monbiot, if you fly, you destroy
other people's lives.
Other people's lives, yes.
Thank you. Questions? Another really prominent environmentalist, Bill McKibben, wrote a book called Earth, and it's Earth spelled with 2 A's because he says we're now living on an Earth that's very different than the Earth that started. And he actually talks about that a lot because he also makes the point, just like George Monbiot, of we need to reduce our carbon emissions somehow. Flying's a really big contributor. But he makes the point of, yes, we have all this developed technology, and that's not going to go away. So we can use this to Skype and FaceTime people in other countries. We can use the internet to learn about other countries. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that, if learning from a screen is the same thing as being immersed in a culture or a country. But if climate change is something that's really important to us, and if we really care about the earth and the life of everyone on it, I think that's something that we do need to consider.
Yeah. Well, so throughout the chapter Love Miles, he goes through different types of planes and different ways that we try to justify flying. But he doesn't come to a conclusion that we can ever justify it. His suggestion is to take more sustainable transportation, and if you do need to go somewhere, it's probably going to take you a lot longer, and it won't be as convenient because the most sustainable ways aren't that efficient with time.
Kind of going off of that, I co-led a spring break trip focused on sustainability, and we were kind of in a dilemma with this too because we decided to go to Portland, Oregon, which is kind of far away from Fargo, North Dakota. And my co-leader and I were talking, and we were originally going to fly because that would give us a lot more time in Portland to learn about sustainability. But we eventually decided that we would take an Amtrak, which was 32 hours one way. So really kind of inconvenient. We all slept on really uncomfortable chairs, but it was a really good learning experience too, to see that flying isn't the only option. I think so many of us live in a world where flying is just the norm. That's how you travel. But there really are other ways.
Definitely. I think the HILT trip, what Kelsey was describing, the high impact leadership trips, is another way that we can do that. And one of the things that we really focused on our India program was that the same injustices that are occurring in India are occurring here, and we don't explore our backyard. And that would be a great thing for Concordia to look at, as we have a goal in whole world for 100% of students to study away while they're here. And so those trips and semesters could look at the injustices and those same issues here in the U.S.
I think that is a really good idea, but I think George Monbiot's response would be, we're still justifying it. There's going to be people like you that are going to look for that eco option, and they're going to want to offset their carbon, but there's going to be a lot of other people that really don't care at this point. And so I think if that would be something that is kind of across the board, maybe, I don't know all of the specific scientific research, but I think at this point there are very few people that would be willing to do that, or especially to pay more to do something like that.
And it takes a lot of reduction to equate to one flight. So he talks about how we'd have to cut back heating, electricity, and transportation. And even with those things in our daily life, it doesn't equate to flying. And so it's really hard to find that balance, even though we should continue, if we're going to do those things, to find the most environmentally friendly way to do it. But to say that that equates to flying, he says, isn't true. Very good.
Thank you.